Hi, my friends. This is Shmuel Gonzales, the Barrio Boychik, coming to you from Boyle Heights History Studios Museum and Cultural Center. And today I'm coming at you with a final video in the series that we have been doing in this week-long series that we've been doing in observance of the 77th anniversary of the Zoot Suit Riots. And so I'm wrapping up with one final video on today in which we're going to be talking not so much about the riots. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the actual style of the Zoot Suit. Many of you have been sending me all kinds of wonderful questions about the style of the Zoot Suit and basic questions as to where it comes from. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to be talking about this because the other night I made a quick video to talk about how this style of the Zoot Suit has been banned for 77 years since the Zoot Suit Riots. Since June 10th of 1943, the wearing of the Zoot Suit has been banned by city ordinance within the boundaries of the city of Los Angeles. And a law that still remains on the books to this day. For those of you who kind of know about history, know that there's all these weird, just kind of antiquated laws on the books. Then unless people challenge them, people don't ever remove them. And interestingly, 77 years later, there is still a law on the books which bans the wearing of the Zoot Suit with reap pleats within the boundaries of the city of Los Angeles as a public nuisance. And so what we're going to be doing, though, is we're going to be talking about a little bit about the history of the Zoot Suit. Where does it come from and why does it cause so much offense? How is it that the style of the Zoot Suit would lead to people, who wear it being demonized by the media? Would lead to people being criminalized, simply for wearing it. And that ultimately, this style of dress would be banned as a public nuisance, that on site, it would evoke violence against the wearer, that, you needed to ban the wearing of it within the city boundaries. And so we're going to talk about the style of the Zoot Suit, where it comes from, and really, why it drew on so much ire. But in order for us, to really step back into this era, to really appreciate this history, one of the first things that we really need to talk about before we even get into talking about the Zoot Suit era, is we need to recall that we're stepping back into a point in history in which America is segregated, in which there are separate movie theaters, separate dance halls, separate schools, separate drinking fountains for white people and Black people within this country. And we're in the age of Jim Crow segregation. And we're actually really in some of the early years of Jim Crow segregation, believe it or not. In the United States, believe it or not, segregation was actually illegal up until 1926. Up until 1926, the Supreme Court had constantly knocked down any attempts at trying to enforce legalized segregation within the United States. However, in 1926, surprisingly, the Supreme Court upholds the enforcement of restrictive covenants, adding of extra deeds, extra clauses onto the deeds of houses that are being built in modern metropolitan areas, and that are limiting the sale of houses to only to white Caucasian people. And it restricts the sale of homes to Black people, to Mexican Americans, to Asian people, to Jewish people. And so we're stepping back into a point in time in which America, and indeed the city of Los Angeles, is segregated. Everyone who pretty much is not a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant by the 1930s really does not have the ability to really be able to buy into and to live in peace in the main city centers of Los Angeles. People of color and white minorities, as well as Black people, are all relegated to communities south of Adams, creating South Central Los Angeles, and east of the Los Angeles River, creating East Los Angeles. So that is rather important for us to note, that we're stepping back into a time in which there is segregation, which runs through everything. Everything in the United States at this point is designed in order to keep white people and people of color separated. And indeed, the city of Los Angeles at this time is considered, throughout the 1920s, the 1930s, going into the 1940s, is considered one of the whitest city in America because of how ingrained modern segregation is into the city of Los Angeles. So that's rather important for us to bring up before we start, talking about anything else, is that we're stepping back into the Jim Crow era. And so that's very important for us to know. That will help us understand why there is so much offense about the Zoot Suit. Now, one of the first things that I need to bring up when we talk about the Zoot Suit is that the Zoot Suit does not originate in the Mexican American community. Oh no, it does not begin with Mexican Americans, and it does not end with us. It is a style, though, in which we adopt. And so where does the style come from? And I've often heard many urban legends about where the style comes from. But I really did some deep research and was really listening, spent a lot of time listening to the oral histories of the veteranos who lived through these eras. I've been very fortunate to be able to interview some people who lived through those eras, and they were really able to shed some light on the origins of the Zoot Suit. So let me go ahead and bring up some of our images right now. And let me get my screen share. 1 second. One of the important things for us to recognize is that the Zoot Suit actually begins in the African American community. The Zoot Suit emerges from the jazz swing subculture of African Americans. As you all know, jazz and swing emerge as African American styles of music here in the United States. And consequently, the style of jazz music gives rise to the Zoot Suit style, in which people, in order to be able to do some of these wild moves that you do during swing music, during swing dancing, you need a little bit of extra room within it. And therefore, some of these swing dancers have their suits altered in order to add some extra leg space within them, and thus is born the Zoot Suit. But the first place that the Zoot Suit emerges from is from the dance clubs, the swing and jazz dance clubs in Georgia, outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And these are some pictures back from Atlanta, Georgia, of young teenage Zoot Suiters. Yeah. Now, what eventually happens, though, is there is this great migration of African American people being called up for industrial jobs in northern cities. And consequently, around the 1930s, this style is going to migrate with African Americans from Georgia up to Harlem in New York, where it is going to be really taken, it's really going to take the swing subculture by storm there. And it's going to emerge from some of the most famous swing clubs, including the very, very famous Cotton Club in Harlem. And so these are some early pictures of, people swing dancing in early Zoot Suits. And what I want to call your attention to is back behind there. You notice that there are white people who are watching swing dancing, being demonstrated for them. And that's really, really, that's really one of the most important things I want you to take notice of as we're going through this. We're going to talk a little bit more of that in a moment. Keep that image seared in your mind. So who popularizes the Zoot Suit and who brings it to Los Angeles? The guy who really popularizes the Zoot Suit in America in general, but who brings it to Los Angeles in glorious style is this hep cat by the name of Calloway. And Cab Calloway would become famous as a singer and band leader from the Cotton Club in Harlem. And he came to Los Angeles and would perform at many of the clubs off of Central Avenue in South Central Los Angeles. But he also went on to have some really, really big gigs being band leader at the Cotton Club of the Ambassador Hotel, as well as serving as band leader for some time at the Hollywood Bowl. He also became famous throughout the country for really being the golden goose, really being the big star for Paramount Pictures. And this is a photo of taken from one of his films in 1935 in one of his zoot suits. And it's all there. What's amazing though about his zoot suit is that he is really one of the most styling hip cats, in that he has this zoot suit designed in the same color from his shoes all the way up to his hat there. And so yeah, that's Cab Calloway right there. And now this is actually a picture of an authentic zoot suit. We're actually very lucky because here in the city of Los Angeles, we actually have one of the only authentic zoot suits that historians know to be existent from the zoot suit era of the 1940s. And not many zoot suits apparently survive from the 1930s and the 1940s. This specimen was acquired from Harlem and is now owned by the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, LACMA, where they have it on display. And but that's that's really amazing that they were actually able to source an authentic zoot suit to have display here in the city of Los Angeles. And so that is an authentic zoot suit. And people ask me when they see this picture, is that right that they have such a bright colored shirt there? And yes, it was very common for you to have a contrasting very bright shirt underneath this. But this is a rather fine light colored tweed, a really, really amazing zoot suit. And really, so what makes a zoot suit? How do you know that you got a zoot suit? And I see all kinds of people who post pictures on Instagram and will say that they have a zoot suit. And it's some of the things that I see. People do a good job of trying to recreate the style. However, there are certain elements which really make an authentic zoot suit. And if you don't really have these elements, then you really don't have an authentic zoot suit. There are certain things that you'll see sold out there, which should be rightfully called and are labeled as such as zoot tuxes. And those are costumes which are basically designed for fancy dress for costume parties. And but if you want to have an authentic zoot suit, there's certain elements that make a suit a zoot suit. And one of the things about it is that it really starts with the drapes. It really starts with the pants. And for your pants, you need at least 50 inches at the legs, and taper down to usually about 10, 11 inches in the cuffs at the ankles. And so these are very, very, very exaggerated size, inseams that we have within the pants. You need to have at least 40 inches within the inseam within there. And also with your coat, the coat is also exaggerated in size with a little bit of extra room as well. And you need a coat that is at least fingertip length. And, that is really what you need in order to have a proper zoot is you need to have at least 40 inches within the legs, and you want to have a coat that is at least fingertip length, if not longer. The longer you have your coat, the more chingon you are. And so that's really important. The other very famous element of the zoot suit is the hat. The hat is always one of the the standard elements of the zoot suit. And traditionally, the type of hat that you would wear is a round hat. And the real style hat that really people really primarily wore in the early days with the zoot suit is what we call the Panama hat, a very round hat like you see on the gentleman right here. And that really became popular, especially around 1942, 1943. Lena Horne, the first appearance of a Black woman taking a lead in a film is Lena Horne in a film called Panama Hat. And yeah, the Panama hat is really made popular by Hollywood, and it becomes one of the standard styles that is used, a round hat as part of your zoot suit. Later on, it's also paired with the pork pie hat. Here in Los Angeles, that becomes very, very popular among young teenage guys is the pork pie hat. And because you didn't need quite as much felt in one of those either. And so those are kind of the elements of what makes a zoot suit. And there were within the Mexican American community, there were a lot of youth who really lunged at this style that was made popular by Hollywood in the films, and that was made popular by popular culture through jazz swing music. That was really the style of music. And one of the points I kind of want to make is that a lot of things that are popular really begin in African American communities. For generations, a lot of the most popular styles have really emerged from African American communities. In my youth, it was the rap and R&B musical styles that emerged from the African American community, and reggaeton and all of this that emerges as well. But in previous generations, it was disco and funk. Prior to that, it was soul and doo-wop. And we're stepping back even farther into this, in which we're talking about jazz and swing as being these influences of music, and that are also being celebrated, in dance, on film, and in Hollywood films. And it's becoming popularized, and young Mexican Americans fell in love with this. And so these are pictures of here in Los Angeles of young people wearing their zoot suits. And but here in Los Angeles, zoot suiters, if you were a Mexican American zoot suiter, generally the wearing of a zoot suit got you labeled as a pachuco. And where does this term pachuco come from? Where does it come from? And because it's a very polarizing statement. I mean, to this day, depending on the generation, especially if you're talking to older people, if people are calling you a pachuco, what they're essentially is they're calling you a punk. They're calling you a punk. And it was always used derisively, and consequently, because it was used derisively by the older generation, it was embraced by the younger generation, who kind of wore it with pride. You're calling it pachuco, pues soy pachuco y qué, and so what? And so that's but where does the term pachuco come from? Well, the term pachuco actually comes from one of our sister communities. We actually have a sister city you know, to East LA, and that's El Paso. And you know, the barrio in, you know, the historic Mexican American community in El Paso was known as, you know, El Chuco. You know, was known as El Chuco, and so you know, that's really where that term comes from. You know, what does Chuco mean? The term Chuco actually means like a mutt, you know, a street mutt. And think about like the term, you know, think about the name of the movie, Lady and the Tramp. You know, the dog is the tramp, and he's a chuco. And so that is what a chuco yeah, a street mutt. And so consequently, this becomes there is this term, you know, like we have here in the barrio, you know, a side of the barrio that's called Dogtown and stuff like this. Well, that's kind of what you're getting at in how El Chuco, you know, gets its name. And consequently, what's kind of interesting about it is that as young Mexican Americans would, you know, leave, you know, excuse me, losing my microphone here. I have it only very lightly attached here because I don't want to make holes in my zoot suit. Excuse me. But what happens is that as the young zoot suiters would leave their barrio, you know, to go on dancing and, you know, to movies in different barrios, what happens in, you know, and into the heart of the city, what happens is that the, you know, the older people would just kind of, you know, stare and gawk at the young people, and the statement, you know, would kind of be made, "Ay, mira todos ese jóvenes, ¿de dónde sale?" You know, and you know, the response would be, you know, para el chuco, you know, from the chuco. And so para el chuco ends up becoming kind of translated into pachuco. And consequently, as you start getting a bunch of people that start to migrate from El Paso here to Los Angeles, the term actually, you know, gets you know, brought along with it. And so that's rather interesting. The term pachuco comes back to, you know, it goes back to El Paso, to the barrio there in, you know, a derisive, you know, term that is used by the older generation towards, you know, the young people. And it's generally used like that as these young people are punks. And why are these young people considered punks? You know, it's not just white people that consider, you know, young Mexican Americans that are taking the Zoot Suit punks. Even more so, Mexican American parents and the older generation see their young people as pachucos, as punks. And indeed, they think that there's something wrong with their young people. And the reason is because these young people are different from Mexican Americans of previous generations. You know, once the Great Depression is starting to break with new jobs being created, they are going to take up some of these jobs, and they are not just going to be okay with, you know, going back to their own neighborhoods for entertainment, for the movies and the dancing at the all brown, you know, locations and stuff like that. They wanted to be part of regular society like everyone else. They wanted to, you know, dress the pop culture. They wanted to go to the movies, the dance clubs, the cafes like everyone else. And consequently, they really lunged at trying to assimilate into American culture in many ways. And so what happens is that for Mexican Americans, the older generation saw the young people you know, being lost into an American society that they did not understand, that indeed they were losing themselves to this black society, you know, out there as well, to colored society, not even the right American society, but to colored society. And you know, this became a thing that even Mexican Americans thought there was something wrong with their young people. They were becoming ill-mannered, you know, pachucos, who were turning their backs on the traditional roles and culture, that they were losing, to the pop culture. And so that really becomes how this endearing term pachuco, you know, really comes, you know, to be. Now, people ask me, you know, you refer to yourself as a pachuco, and yeah, because like, you know, like you know, younger people, you know, of that generation, they took the slur and they decided to wear it with pride. You can't really hurt people with something that they decided to wear with pride. And it's kind of like, I hear a lot of young people, young people today who come and meet here for events. We have young Mexican Americans who, have, all kinds of queer cultural, groups that meet here and that do exhibits and stuff like that. And a lot of people were really annoyed about that too. Like, no. Why are these gay people using the term queer? No, we're supposed to call you that. Now, what are we supposed to call you? You guys are using it. I think that's the point. And I think that's the point. And yeah, maybe you should just call us people. But that's kind of that's kind of the point I want to make about the term pachuco. Is there's certain people, people like me who wear it with pride. You can't hurt us with the term by which, we wear it with pride. But what is important for us to note is that, later on, when we talk about Zoot Suit culture, there is going to be, as we talk about the elements of the Zoot Suit, they often bring up about the different types of elements, how they're referred to in the Tagalog, in Zoot Suit speak, in kind of the Spanglish that was common to Zoot Suiters. But we got one of the things I do, I don't want to spend too much time on that, tonight. What I do want to, point out is that in Los Angeles, this was less common in the early 1940s, more common in the late 1940s, starting around 1949 and going into the 50s. Because for the most part, in Los Angeles, the banning of speaking in Spanish in public, and the abuses that you would get for it, including spankings in school, depending on where you went to school, the speaking of Spanish was really suppressed. So a lot of Mexican Americans, including my family that grew up in that generation, didn't speak Spanish. They just really didn't. And they mostly spoke to each other in a lot of the slang of Pachucos. And they spoke to themselves in the common slang of the jazz swing subculture, mostly in English. So that's one of the things that, also, is rather important to note, is that early on, that's also another big issue is, there's kind of a divide, within, the generations, is that, young people are really picking up the way that they speak from the jazz and swing music that they're listening to. But one of the things I do want to make a case, though, about the Zoot Suit is that we do need to really celebrate the Zoot Suit as really being one of these wonderful displays of a multi-ethnic influence, especially within our city of Los Angeles. While it's true that the Zoot Suit emerges from the jazz and swing halls of African-American communities, through the music and style, it would really go beyond the confines of the Black communities and attract many, many headcats from different backgrounds all across the country. The Los Angeles Zoot Suit style would be influenced by Black people, but also embraced by Italians, by Jews, Filipinos, Japanese, your average Anglo-American headcats who also love swing music would take on the style of the Zoot Suit. But it's really an amalgam of all kinds of different touches that eventually give rise to the Zoot Suit style that we really see crystallized in the Los Angeles Zoot Suiter, in the Los Angeles Pachuco. One of the very interesting things to note, though, is that in Los Angeles, it was less necessary for people to have a hat in the early years. Indeed, a lot of people chose not to wear hats because they wanted to show off their hair. They really wanted to show off they wanted to show off their hair because here in Los Angeles, we actually had one of these wild hairstyles that people really loved to show off, and it was called the ducktail. And basically, what you would do is that you would grow extra length up to your hair in order to bring it up, kind of high, little pump here, wrap it around the sides until it would wrap together into the back, and it kind of looked like a duck's ass in the back. And so that's the ducktail. And think of how. Think of the back of how Daffy Duck or or Donald Duck was drawn, and that's kind of how the hair came together in the back. And believe it or not, this hairstyle actually came from Filipinos, from Filipino zoot suiters from San Pedro, from San Pedro. Once the Mexican Americans who lived side by side, in San Pedro with them saw the style, and they really embraced it with glorious zeal. And so the ducktail becomes really one of these enduring styles of the Zoot Suit era. I've tried several times to grow out my hair to be authentic, onto the ducktail. Unfortunately, I'm really OCD about my hair, so I really can't do it. But you need to have at least an inch and a half, grown out around the sides as you bring it, towards the back, and that's much longer than the hair that many of us wear today. But that's important to note, is that the Zoot Suit style and the music influence is most noticeable in ethnic and working class communities. And so, that's, rather important, for us to note. It is definitely something that really animates the working class ethnic communities. And rightfully so, because, this is music that is, that has been created, by people of color, for people of color. And the dress is something that, emerges as a style that people of color came up on their own, came with on their own. And, that was leaving a mark, and that was making influence in America. And, that's really, really important, for us to know that, naturally many people of color, many minorities, really saw this as, a beautiful thing, that there is this other America out there that is not just pasty white. And that there that in America, people of color are starting to come of age and starting to make a mark in the pop culture. And this is what we're looking at at a moment in history in which people of color are starting to make an influence in the greater pop culture of our country. And so, the Zoot Suit, prior to the Zoot Suit Riots, is not a new style to our country. It had, white people, as well as Black people, throughout the country, had, made the style, popular. It would even be, middle class and upper middle class, hepcats, white hepcats throughout the country that would, embrace this style and the dancing, of swing music. And here we have some pictures, of some white guys, in their zoot suits here. And yeah. And, this is a rather interesting picture that I have here on the screen of here in Los Angeles. These are two white zoot suiters that are being checked out by this American GI, who is here, stationed, during the wartime. And I guess this is one of their dances. It looks like an auditorium here. And you have these white hip cats who are showing up in their zoot suits, and this GI is just checking, like, my God, he's looking at just kind of with awe here. But this, people are taking notice. It is a flashy style, but they, as you see, they aren't threatened, here in this picture, by this style. So what happens with this style? How does it eventually become demonized? How does it become considered a un-American style? And really how it becomes an un-American style is, during World War II, the zoot suit is forced to go underground because of rationing that goes into effect during World War II. In March of 1942, the War Production Board, the WPB, as well as one of the boards that gave out the books. You would get yourself books that limited your consumption of all kinds of different types of products. You got yourself rationing books that were given to you by the government. And the War Production Board likewise began to regulate the use of fabric. And they began to regulate the manufacturing of men's suits and all clothes which contained wool. And so in order to achieve a 26% cutback on the use of fabrics, the WPB drew up regulations for the manufacturing of what Esquire magazine called, quote, streamlined suits for Uncle Sam, end quote. And so the regulations effectively forbade the manufacturing of wide-cut zoot suits and full-length skirts or dresses. You can no longer make long suits. You can no longer make full-length skirts and dresses in order to preserve consumption of fabric. However, there was a network of bootleg tailors throughout Los Angeles and New York which continued to produce the zoot suits. Specifically, a lot of the people who did the production of the zoot suits were not just African-American tailors, but a lot of the really, really good zoot suit tailors were Italians. Of course, Italians have always been, wonderful, wonderful, tailors, as well as, Jewish tailors. Jewish tailors, in our area would also continue to, make the zoot suits. And you also kind of got to imagine that, there's certain minorities who, consider these types of rationings to be going too far. To be going too far. Indeed, especially for Jewish people, traditional Jewish people like Mexican-American women at this generation generally, wear full-length skirts because of religious modesty, because of cultural modesty. You generally wear full-length skirts. However, this is forbidden. And, some people are going to think this is wrong. And obviously, they're going to continue, to produce, these according to, the religious and cultural tradition. And so likewise, you're going to find, tailors that are going to make these suits for zoot suiters. In our neighborhood, in our neighborhood, it would be, places like Zalman's Menswear. For 3 generations, from the 1930s until 1999, served, the community here. And the Zalmans, you could be able to get your zoot suits there. If you were in Watts, back in the zoot suit era, that would have been Greenspans. And that Greenspans, which, OG Greenspans, which is, today with Southgate. They had the original shop over in Watts, when that was, again, a community of white minorities, working class people, as well as, African Americans, Mexicans, Jewish people. There were certain places where you could still continue to get, the zoot suits made. What's funny is that when I got my zoot suit, tailored and everything, and I put on my, my coat, my, tacuche for the first time, one of my friends, Chicano friends, he laughed and he says, Mazel Tov, it looks like a beautiful kapatza. It looked like, exactly like a coat that you would expect a, Hasidic, Hasidic Jew to be wearing, long style cut like that. And there was definitely, people within minority communities that still continue to, make these suits because they thought that the bans against, especially the zoot suit, was just arbitrary. Was just arbitrary, and that this type of government regulation was just unfair and indeed racist as well. So despite the ban, there still continue to be tailors that made them. And of course, young people who own their suits continue to wear them. Despite the effective ban, the style did not go into decline as youth continue to wear these garments that they cherished. Indeed, it probably won over a few extra fans, as whenever you ban something, of course, people just want to be part of it. And so that's one thing to be brought up. But throughout the newspapers, there's these articles that are going out about that zoot suiters are still wearing, these suits despite there being an OPA ban, from the people who give out the books, the rationing books. Draped garments to disappear when present wardrobe's gone because output halted. Yeah, right. Yeah, that never happened. But what happens is that, in the newspapers, though, there are these, these editorializations of caricatures of zoot suiters that are actually making fun of the police. Before the Zoot Suit Riots, are making fun of the police for not basically arresting, for not beating zoot suiters for their style of dress. And as you see, this cartoon, which met up with this article there, it actually makes fun of the police. And it says, at the bottom, in style, these are zoot suits as seen by staff artists. And, apparently a member of the public is asking, what's up with these zoot suits? And, the cop is telling them to be quiet. Stop buzzing, cousin. Them solid citizens minding their own business. And, kind of make fun of them within this, making a mockery of the police for not, at this point, not arresting, not beating, people in zoot suits, which had happened prior to the zoot suits, during the Sleepy Lagoon case and stuff like this. You get 600 youth that are put in jail just for wearing zoot suits. And that's rather important. But one of the other big slanders that comes out at this time is that people characterize the zoot suiters as being un-American. Indeed, they are draft dodgers. They're what makes the zoot suit so bad is that it is showing on their face that these zoot suiters are draft dodgers who are not suited up for the war effort. And this is also, characterized in articles in the newspaper. You see this guy in apparently a fine tweed, zoot suit, and he kind of looks like Tintan, about 7 or so years before Tintan even knows what a zoot suit is. But you see, right here, in front of a sign that says the Army needs men. You see a zoot suiter up against a post, dressed up as a dandy. They're picking his teeth, leaning up against it, dressed up as a dandy. And it says unwarranted deferment. And it says does not apply to him. And so what it makes out is that this dress is un-American. This dress is thoroughly un-American. Because not only is it not adhering to rationing, but it's a clear sign that these people do not intend to be outfitted for the war. These Mexicans are nothing but grand draft dodgers, and so that becomes one of the insults. And so one of the other things that's made when you talk about the zoot suit is that they even in a lot of the articles they make depictions of zoot suiters as being effeminate, grotesquely dressed youth. And basically they say that zoot suiters are dandies, they're girly men. And that doesn't really work at stopping young people from wearing the zoot suit. So they have to go even further. And this is a caricature that was created on June 16th, 1943. And for the San Luis Obispo, California, the Telegram Tribune, I found this cartoon. I wasn't able to find it in our local archives. It was printed in local papers, but I wasn't able to find it in the end. But I was able to find it in San Luis Obispo. And here is a cartoon which went across the news wires. And what it shows here is it shows Hitler in a zoot suit with the swastika in the middle of his tie there. And it says, with V's, kind of like he's speaking, German, Val, why not? Ain't you hoodlums too? And something like this. And so what happens is that it makes out that zoot suiters are fascists. And indeed, some of the newspapers try to do that. They, at different types of times, they try to aligned Mexican Americans with Sinarquistas, with Mexican fascists. And you know, Mexican Americans had no connection really to Mexican politics. I mean, we were workers. We had no time to really and no interest in being involved in in Mexican fascism and stuff like that. Never even heard of the stuff. But these are kind of things that are used in the news media in order to demonize zoot suiters. And so yeah, but what's rather insulting about this is that Mexican Americans are actually really serving in large numbers during the war, during World War II. In fact, Latinos make up a really small percentage of the population. Really, they're not even 5% of the entire population of the country. I mean, that's not just Mexican Americans. That's if you include Cubans and Puerto Ricans and everyone else. Not even 5% of the population. However, they make up a huge double-digit chunks of almost 20% of people serving in uniform during World War II. That means that Mexican Americans, that means Latin Americans are serving in larger numbers in averages than white Anglos. And it's also because Mexican Americans, a lot are joining the war effort early on in order to be able to take advantage of this opportunity, in order to take advantage of the army on giving them jobs and possibility for education and the GI Bill and all these things, in order to break the cycle of poverty, that they are going to be able to break the cycle of poverty, as well as earn respect for themselves in this country by serving for this country. And so consequently, a lot of Mexican Americans, once the war starts, they eagerly sign up for the war, and many were just waiting, chomping at the bit, waiting to be deployed to war. Indeed, people that were beat up in the Zoot Suit Riots, people that were even beat up, during the Sleepy Lagoon case and stuff like this, almost all of those primary people were people who had already signed up for the war effort, and that their being involved in that was derailed by their criminalization by riots and stuff like this. So that's rather important for us to note, is that it is wrong for people to say that this is the zoot suit is a symbol that Mexican Americans do not intend to be suited up for the war effort. And so that's an important case for us to make. This picture, I love this picture. I know I've traumatized us with all of these rough things, but I want to show you some pictures here, because people have demonized the zoot suit. Let me show you some pictures that will raise our spirit. These are pictures of two of the most important civil rights leaders of this country, of the civil rights movement of the 60s. And what we see here on the left is Cesar Chavez when he's about 15 years old, wearing a zoot suit in San Jose. He's a teenager, and what's interesting is that he's standing next to the girl that's going to later become his wife. It's just that he's dating the other guy at the time. And on the right, this is the guy with this cocky look on his face. This is Malcolm X at 15 years old, wearing a zoot suit. And so that's that's to make us feel better about this. But one of the things that I really need to make in order to make the case about the why this is so wrong, the attacking of zoot suiters for not being involved in the war effort, for not being suited up for the war effort, is that one of the realities that really needs to be talked about is that the way that a lot of Mexican Americans were actually able to afford a zoot suit was by involving themselves in the war effort, including teenagers, including teenagers. For instance, here on the East Side, the way most kids are able to afford their zoot suits was through the money that they were making in the jobs they were fulfilling during the wartime. During World War II, with men being sent away to the front lines of war, there was a lot of people that were called up to fulfill industrial jobs that were traditionally filled, only by, most qualified men. Now, during the wartime, there was a bunch of people that needed to be, called up and trained in order to fulfill a lot of those jobs, in order to supply the war effort, including building things such as warplanes. And so what happens is that many young people here in Los Angeles would be given jobs during World War II, creating items for the war effort, including planes. Such as over here in East Los Angeles, these are pictures of Garfield High School students creating planes, creating P-38 Lightning bombers, that were being created for the war efforts. And basically what happens is that young people during the war, they were given the ability to work either part-time or full-time. They were able to sign up through their high schools in order to work in different factories creating warplanes. And you would be given school credit for it, as well as paid. And you'd be paid, the minimum wage, which was 60 cents an hour, which really wasn't that bad. That was actually pretty good wages in 1942, 1943. I say this because a fine zoot suit was on $29.95, and so a week's worth of effort got you really close to being able to own a zoot suit. Within a few weeks, you could own a zoot suit. And so that's really what happens is that with the coming of World War II, we really see the end of the Great Depression. Young people who had been born pretty much into poverty, had lived in poverty their entire lives, are now seeing good times as even kids are being called up and are being paid good wages, and supplying the war efforts. And then this is a picture of the plane which they created here in the East Side, the P-38, and this is really the war which won the Pacific. This is the plane which won the Pacific. It's especially recognized as being the plane that shot down the airplane carrying Japanese Admiral Yamamoto, and killing the man who had planned the Pearl Harbor attack. And yeah, these were created by high school students, here on the East Side. And but making money in this war effort, what they wanted to do is that they naturally wanted to spend their money like everyone else. They wanted to go to the movies, they wanted to go to the dance clubs, they wanted to go to the cafes, and they wanted to do it in style. And, therefore, a lot of the young people spent, their first paychecks on their zoot suits so that they could go out onto the town in style. And these are some pictures of some zoot suiters from here in Los Angeles in the 1940s. Isn't that some... Aren't these some stunning pictures? Gorgeous, gorgeous, clean style. Wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous. But that's what's really rather important for us to know, is that young Mexican Americans had disposable cash and they wanted to enjoy the nightlife of Los Angeles. They wanted to be part of that nightlife out there. And that's what really was so very threatening, is that Mexican Americans at this time, they decide that they are no longer going to abide by the gentleman's agreement in which, people of color go to the city centers to fulfill jobs. But for your entertainment, you go back to your own damn neighborhood. No, they want to be part of the greater society out there. And, the swing and jazz movement, the Zoot Suit movement introduces a generation of young Mexican Americans, a first generation of young Mexican Americans who are coming upon financial good times. They are being introduced to another world out there. They are wanting to be part of that nightlife, going to all of these different places in the heart of the city. And that comes with great threat for white society, who is not used to seeing, who's not used to seeing this, who's not used to seeing people of color, especially Mexican Americans, really, moving in their own and operating in their own agency. This is especially shocking for, as you start to, in the city, we start to see the flood of 100,000 sailors, servicemen that are flooding into our city during the wartime. And these people come from, all over America, from a segregated America, which they're not used to, seeing people of color, let alone coming into a city of Los Angeles where they see Mexican Americans who, are born in this city in large numbers, who are increasingly aware that they are really not a minority in this city, that they are a formidable population, within this city. And therefore, they walk around this city with great confidence. They do not feel alien in a city in which they were born, in a city in which their Mexican and Spanish ancestors had founded. And that comes with great shock by many sailors who cannot abide by this, that there are these people of color who are walking around this town acting like this town is theirs. No, they need to put these people back in their place. Indeed, these zoot suiters, they literally, are acting too big for their britches, and their britches are getting even bigger along the way. So we better show them. And so that's what really, happened, in the Zoot Suit era, is that the Zoot Suit riots, in this era, what we see is this great violence that is directed at Mexican Americans, at people of color, or deciding that they are no longer going to abide by the Jim Crow segregation that has been so thoroughly ingrained into the city, and they are ultimately going to be beaten. They're going to find a white society that is going to try to beat them back into their place. And so that is, rather, important, for us to note, is that the Zoot Suit stands stands out as a symbol, as a style from a moment in history in which people of color are coming of age in the American experience, in which we are starting to have influence in popular culture, and that is threatening to white America. On top of that, there are many of us who are starting to who are starting to challenge the segregation which is ingrained into this country, and that we are no longer going to, willingly self-segregate ourselves. And so this is a very, very important moment in history. Though, one of the things that, as we talk about, the history of the Zoot Suit, ultimately, the Zoot Suit becomes one of these symbols that is attacked by, the sailors of the Zoot Suit riots, with the help of the police, with vigilantes, just your average white vigilantes of the city, taking advantage of the opportunity in order, to attack young people purely for the way that they're dressed. And I think that, that's really one of the, the really traumatic things. I often warn, people today, it is not uncommon even today when I every so often encounter, people of the older generation who, when they encounter some of the oddball styles of younger people, they, really vilify, people of color, especially for, some of the street styles that they wear. For instance, I remember, a few years back now, but when there was the killing of a young man, because he was wearing a hoodie, because he was wearing a hoodie, he was villainized as being a thug in a hoodie, and a man, killed him, vigilante style, executed him, for wearing a hoodie, and in the defense, of this killing, the young child was made out as being a thug because, he was wearing a hoodie. And, what was so surprising is I saw a lot of people say that, oh my gosh, well, those kids, walk around town, like thugs, with their, not just their hoodies, but their pants sagging, and, finally one of them are getting what they deserved. And I really had to shame a lot of older people and say, are you really saying that the killing of this young person is justifiable because you're offended by the way that they dress, because you think that the way that they, this young person is dressing is the epitome of thuggery, that you believe that this young Black man had to die vicariously because you're offended by other people's hoodies and their sagging pants? Really? And some people had to think about that and be like, oh my gosh, no, it's true. It's sad. There's been a lot of there's been a lot of young people, and often people of color who've been beaten down, indeed killed, just for being demonized for the way that they dress, and that's wrong. And it's important to note that this violence really stands out as one of the most dramatic forms of violence, because of the way that it was directed at all young people who wore the zoot suits, as well as all young Mexican Americans at this point. As you see in the pictures on the screen, we're looking at pictures of young people as young as 14 years old who were stripped of their zoot suits and were left naked there, bleeding, their zoot suits in many cases after their attacks lit on fire, like one would a flag that offended people. And so that's really, really one of the traumatic things about this moment in history, is that we're looking at a moment in history in which, young people are being attacked by vigilantes, and by white vigilantes, and they're not being punished by the police. And on top of that, you also have the complicity of the police, that you could see, systemic racism, that is being displayed by the police system as well. And so that is really what kind of makes the Zoot Suit Riots very similar to what caused a lot of the pain and outcry that we're that we're experiencing today, is that a lot of the a lot of the outcry comes because it was not just in recent weeks. We not just dealt with the case arising of George Floyd, of police brutality, that led to the death of George Floyd, but just prior to that, Americans were traumatized by seeing on television a case in which white people in Texas had decided to exact vigilante violence against a Black man who they saw jogging through their neighborhood. And because he's a Black man jogging through their neighborhood, running through their neighborhood, they assumed that he was stealing something. And like good old boys, they hunted him down, in a truck, got out of that truck and shot him dead while people, recorded it and released it to the social media. And, consequently, there, for the first few weeks, going into months, there was no charges that were brought by the authorities. And, eventually, charges had to be brought, but that happened right about the time, the George Floyd case came up. And so we saw both cases of white vigilantism that was being covered up by the, the authorities up until then, and also, systemic racism, being perpetrated by the police. And I think that's why both the events, even though they're very, very different, they're very, very different, type of events, they do have a similarity in the way that we're processing the pain because of the both the elements of vigilante violence and the elements of systemic racism that is being displayed by the police. One of the important things to note is that the pictures that we have on screen, yes, the police definitely did go after people who were wearing the zoot suit. Vigilantes as well went out of their way to attack young people wearing the zoot suit. So it was not just Mexican Americans; it was also Black kids. It was also Filipinos who were also beaten and arrested during the Zoot Suit Riots, as well. For just wearing the zoot suit. But really, one of the important things, to note about this is that many Mexican Americans, many Mexican American young men are beaten and arrested during the Zoot Suit Riots, even though they are not wearing zoot suits. Indeed, they're even in the, if you recall, for those of you who are on the Zoot Suit Riot bus tour, when we talk about the Sleepy Lagoon, not all of those guys were zoot suiters either. However, because some of them, were zoot suiters, they were all kind of collectively marked as baby gangsters. That the zoot suit, as it was explained by law enforcement and the media to white people, was that this was the symbol to show that zoot suiters were that were gangsters, like Al Capone style gangsters, this type of thing. Just totally false, totally wrong and stuff like that. And therefore, there becomes the criminalization and demonization of young people, of young people of color, as being characterized as thugs because of a style, even if they are wearing it or not. And so that's what's rather important for us to know. Ultimately, the zoot suit, as we recall, does get banned between June 9th and June 10th of 1943. Wednesday going into Thursday night, the Los Angeles City Council pulls an all-nighter in order to enact a resolution. And this is the resolution. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council, by resolution, find that the wearing of zoot suits constitutes a public nuisance and does thereby instruct the city attorney to prepare an ordinance declaring same a nuisance and prohibit the wearing of zoot suits with reed pleats within the city limits of Los Angeles. So from this week, 77 years ago to this day, the zoot suit by city ordinance is banned within the city of Los Angeles. The zoot suit is considered such an offense that it brings people to violence, against, the wearer of it. The only way to stop this is in order to ban the zoot suit. This is enacted. And so consequently, the zoot suit, today, it's rather amazing, when I get messages from people, to this day asking me quite often, hey, the zoot suit, I see you going out often in a zoot suit. And I've even seen pictures of like the police standing by, like really ominously, like, is the zoot suit, still, illegal, to wear it within the city limits? And technically it's still on the books. It's still one of these ordinances that has not been, repealed. And, for those of you who are history buffs, you probably have come across a bunch of strange ordinances, like not allowing a drunken donkey to sleep in your tub at the fine of $250 and strange stuff like that. the old weird antiquated laws that go back to the Old West and stuff like that. And this is an ordinance that's still on the books within the city of Los Angeles. I don't know why it hasn't been repealed. And I say this because the Zootsu is it still continues to be worn by people of color, especially by Mexican Americans, who still continue to embrace this style and hand it down as a heritage, throughout the generations. Indeed, that's how I really know the style. My first, suiting, my first fitting for a zoot suit was for a family wedding. I had a cousin that was getting married. And so, we all got, fitted up for zoot suits. And so, yeah, it's still a very, very popular style. It's a popular style, again, because it relates to the coming of age of Mexican Americans, to Mexican Americans, coming into their own and starting to have a moment of self-awareness about their inclusion in this country. They begin to ultimately zoot suiters ultimately begin to hold this country accountable for the Jim Crow segregation, while at the same time, claiming to be, the land of the free, home of the brave. As people are being persecuted for just wanting, to belong, just wanting to belong to, the greater America out there, are attacked. And so I think that's really one of the important, ways that we should, really talk about, the heritage of the zoot suit, is that the zoot suit, represents the coming of age of the Mexican American, of the Chicano experience. And it represents the line in the sand in which Mexican Americans finally decide to stand up to the white supremacy in this country, which was being fed to us, in which we were even feeding to each other. The idea that if we just behave, if we just try to fit in, then we should have nothing to worry about. Indeed, this moment in history, proves to us differently, in which, Mexican Americans are introduced to the other America out there by African Americans, by Black people, through the swing and, Jews, the Zoot Suit movement, through this, multicultural, form of movement. It's going to challenge the boundaries of Jim Crow segregation, and ultimately the Zoot Suit Riots are going to be the manifestation of that revolt that's going to try to push us back into that Pandora's box. And but it's very important for us to remember that the Zoot Suit Riot, through that moment in history in which Mexican Americans, find out, firsthand, what Black people were enduring in America, in a Jim Crow segregated America, as we started going to the movie theaters, as we started going to the clubs, the restaurants, and finding out that sometimes you couldn't get in, because of your race. And when you were able to get in, that you're often relegated to, to the colored section. I mean, let me give you an example. I mean, we see the dramatic picture, we saw the dramatic pictures of, young Mexican American youth at the Orpheum Theater on the floor, after being defrocked in their zoot suits and everything. But what we need to understand is that for those young people to be there and, being dragged up to the stage area and, being put on display as they had been defrocked and beaten. And, what we need to understand is that in order for them to be beaten, the sailors had to crawl through the entire crowd of the Orpheum Theater, going up to the colored section, which was, in the balcony section, the center balcony, up near the projection room. That's the only place that people of color are allowed to sit, up in the rafters of the balcony, next to the projection room. And you couldn't even sit in near the aisles. Those were reserved for white people as well. Why? Because it was a fire. The white people could get out easier. And so that, white people, had an easier time getting to the restrooms, into the concession stands and like that. There was, if you bothered to go to the movie theaters, you were relegated to these very few seats all the way up in the cielos of the theater. And that's why a lot of Mexican Americans of previous generations didn't go to the movie theaters, because they could not abide by that they were relegated, to the colored section. And the young Mexican Americans, they were willing to endure this if that meant being part of the nightlife. Of course, challenging the boundaries as much as they could. But you got to understand that being a zoot suiter, especially when it's defined by the swing music, this is also very threatening, because the swing music, it's encouraging mixed race dancing, which is illegal. And it's so grotesque, why mixed race dancing is illegal. As you would ask people, why is it illegal for people of different races to dance? Well, because dancing, dancing on the dance floor upright, leads to the horizontal mambo. And God forbid that you have people of color hooking up with white people, which is the ultimate offense. And there's this whole other racializing and sexualizing thing that's kind of even makes young people of color walking in their own agency even seem tawdry, in the way that white people are presenting people of color, emerging from their ghettos, emerging from their barrios, in order to be part of the greater American nightlife. And but I think that's very important for us to recognize that not long ago, indeed, one of the most important histories that we as Mexican Americans recall is that time that we challenged segregation, and we found out firsthand what it meant to be a person of color, what colored people, what Black people went through in this country, and we went through the same experience. And so that is very important for us to really recognize. But we are coming to the end of recognizing this week of observance of the Zoot Suit Riots. And it has been great to be able to recall this history, to be able to reclaim this history that very many people have always been curious about, but have always been kind of afraid to ask, because it's such a sensitive history, especially for our family members who lived through that era, but the Zoot Suit style, it still continues to this day as people wear it for their celebrations, and for their weddings, for graduations, to go out dancing. And but hopefully this next year we're able to really do a lot more talking about the Zoot Suit in order to help people appreciate it as really this all-American style that really does represent the coming of age and of people of color contributing to pop culture of America. And ultimately here in the city of Los Angeles, we get the silly ordinance against the wearing of the Zoot Suit taken down, and because it is a style that does need to be celebrated and does need to be handed down to generations. Now, many of you are send messages to me all the time. Who dresses you? You always look impeccable. You have an authentic Zoot Suit. You know, you always look great. Who suits you up? Who zoots you up? And so I get zooted by El Pachuco Zoot Suit Incorporated. And El Pachuco Zoot Suit Incorporated, you know, Phyllis and Ray and the family, they are great. They're like family, you know, to me, because they they're just so warm. Again, they've suited up my family for our family weddings and stuff like that before. But in recent years, together working to, hand down this heritage, to keep it alive, we've been partnering, speaking to students throughout Southern California, now getting requests from other states in order to, talk with students about, early Mexican-American and Chicano history and the history of the Zoot Suit, especially when students are doing the play, the Zoot Suit. We often get called in, to, talk about the Zoot Suits, as, El Pachuco Zoot Suit also creates, the Zoot Suits for, many of the, schools who, perform the play and who study it, in the classrooms. But El Pachuco Zoot Suit Incorporated for over 40 years have really been, safeguarding and keeping the Zoot Suit heritage. And they made the Zoot Suits for Zoot Suit the play, Zoot Suit the movie. So for over 40 years, they have also been serving the public. And they have been keeping the heritage of this alive. And they're over in Fullerton, off of Harbor. So definitely do go out and see them, and let Vanessa, get your measurements and suit you up. I really, really, really love them, and I think that we really need to support, family businesses and small businesses. Their website is up, and you're able to, make orders. Just remember that when you when you get your measurements and everything, that you measure a little bit higher. You don't measure at your you measure a little bit higher for your for your drapes, for your pants. You have to measure just a little bit higher. But on their website, they even have instructions on how you can, properly take your measurements, for a Zoot Suit. But yeah, shout out to El Pachuco Zoot Suit Incorporated, who is keeping this alive. And do definitely support them. Check out their website, go see them. And yeah, it's been wonderful, the last week being able to talk with you about the heritage of the Zoot Suit, and to talk about the Zoot Suit Riots, and to really be able to redeem this history as our observance of this history is also juxtaposed up against this current struggle for civil rights, against police brutality, and that we are we're still these many years later, having to advocate, for people of color up against police brutality. And it is been really interesting to be able to really be able to remind us all, just how far we have come as Mexican Americans, how much further we still have to go, but but it's also important for us to realize just how much work needs to be done for African Americans. How many gains still need to be achieved and actualized. For our Black brothers and sisters, African American people in this country, to be able to no longer live in fear. And so that, I think it's just really great that we've had a whole week, though, during this really momentous time in history for this country, to be able to recall what our connection is to the African American community. And African American community and the Mexican American community, our civil rights have always been closely tied to each other. It later gets on later on, we have, we have Dr. King, who later gives inspiration to Cesar Chavez. We have the Black Panthers that give inspiration to the Brown Berets, and go down the list of all kinds of different types of movements in which we take inspiration from African American communities, we learn from that example in order how to stand in how to operate in our own agency, and that's very important. But we're still struggling, and it's very important for us to continue to stand by our African American brothers and sisters as they are fighting police brutality to this day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who has been joining us throughout this week of observance of the 77th anniversary of the so-called Zoot Suit Riots. What would better be called the White Sailor Riots. Hopefully we can also make the transition to that name over time as well. But do come and visit us here at the Boyle Heights History Studios Museum and Cultural Center. We're open every day from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. Every day except for Monday. It's my only day off that I have. You can come and you can see the installations and of history that we have here. And also join us for our tours. I'm not sure when we're going to be returning to doing the Zoot Suit Riot bus tour. Because of COVID-19, it's really hard to put a bunch of people inside of a bus together when we really don't know too much yet about the coronavirus, and we really are still trying to find ways best to be able to protect people. Right now I'm just waiting before we do any more Zoot Suit Riot bus tours, but we are going to continue to try to keep the storytelling going as much as we can. If any of you have any oral histories that you would like to share, do come here to our museum. We actually have a green room here where we have lights and cameras on which you can record your history in order to make a copy of it in fine quality to take home, to give to your family, to post online. And also we can also keep a copy here in order to keep your story alive, so that your story bears testament to the struggle, the civil rights struggle. And it's very important that we often hear these stories in the voice in the voice of the person who lived that experience, so that people understand why we express this history in a certain way, with certain terminology, with certain tone. And thank you, everyone, for supporting us throughout the entire COVID-19 crisis. And as we begin to open up, on this Friday, we begin to open up our museum again. In stage 3 reopening, we're just going to be limiting our group sizes to much smaller sizes. However, we are going to open back up and remain in service to you, the community. Call upon us. We're always here at Boyle Heights History Studios, Museum and Cultural Center. Be safe, be well out there.